Thank you for listening to We Have Ways of Making You Talk. Sign up to our Patreon to receive bonus content, live streams, and our weekly newsletter with money off books and museum visits as well, plus early access to all live show tickets. That's patreon.com/wehaveways.
This Father's Day, the Home Depot has same-day delivery on the perfect gift to help Dad be everything he can be. Because your dad is more than just a dad. He's groundskeeper of the yard, the perfecter of the patio, and the cleaner of the clippings. Let the Home Depot help power Dad's doing with the convenience and gas-like power of Milwaukee cordless outdoor tools. Plus, get up to $150 off select Milwaukee tools. For everything Dad is, find the perfect gift at the Home Depot. How doers get more done. Order select and stock items by 4 p.m. subject to availability.
Achtung! Welcome to We Have Ways of Making You Talk with me, Al Murray, and James Holland, the World War II podcast of choice, as it has been this week, as I see that our D-Day episodes are creeping up like a commando on his belly in full tactical mode with a dagger between his teeth, creeping.
Wearing his cat comforter. Well, I've been thinking a lot about commandos this week because I've just been in Norway, which has been fantastic. And going to fjords and sort of going, where would you site your bunker? And if you're in a little kind of, if you're on a klepper boat, where would you canoe? And and one of the things that really, really struck me more than anything else is just how absolutely ridiculous it is to try and invade Norway in any scale, unless you're literally hopping and skipping away.
Yes, unless you're coming over the border from Sweden.
Absolutely forget it. It's just not going to happen. Where are all the beaches? There aren't any. Where's the infrastructure? There isn't any. I mean, in terms of, the sort of coastal roads and all the rest of it. But I mean, just imagine what it was like in 1940s. It was absolutely incredible.
And any port that you're trying to get to is at the end of some great big long wriggly bay, isn't it? Entering anywhere. So I've been to Bergen, and you think, well, there's no way into here without being shot to pieces.
There's none at all. And then I went past the Oscarburg fort, from which the heavy cruiser, the Blucher, was sunk on the early hours of the 9th of April 1940. And this was at the start of the German invasion of Norway. And this whopping great warship going up this the Oslo fjord, which is really pretty narrow in parts. Yeah. And the Oscarsborg fort is positioned on this island in the middle of this very narrow fjord. And it's really narrow anyway.
Yeah.
So as it goes past, it's total Guns of Navarone stuff. I mean, that's why they didn't want to, in the Guns of Navarone movie, I know it's a movie, but the principle's the same.
Yeah.
The reason they wanted that they had to destroy those guns was because no ship could pass below them. And you wouldn't have thought that any ship could get past the Oscarsborg fort. And amazingly, it doesn't.
Yeah. But that also, I mean, tangentially with our D-Day chats. So by the way, I mean, thanks to everyone for listening to them. And
thank you.
I enjoyed them enormously. And we've also since been and done some great walking of the ground since we recorded those, which just the sheer imaginative power of looking at the terrain and looking at the tree lines and all that, what it does to your understanding of it all is it's really fantastic. Anyway, but a big part of the D-Day story is, of course, the 300,000 soldiers in Norway who on June the 6th, 1944 are unable to deploy to the Norman coast. As you say, if Norway's impossible to invade by sea, why bother defending it?
It makes no sense at all. Obviously you protect Oslo and you put some defences in the key port. That's all you need to do. You don't need 300,000.
No.
Not even remotely.
No.
I thought 50,000 would probably cut it, to be honest.
Would change the balance in France enormously.
Yeah. Thank God for Hitler.
I mean, in that respect, yes. I mean,
there was other ways where maybe not, but
it is an extraordinary decision because you're talking another couple of armies, effectively, aren't you?
Oh, completely, yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
it's just extraordinary.
Or on the Eastern Front, it doesn't matter where they decide to deploy those people.
And you think about how the Allies do amphibious operations, and you think from a German point of view. Okay, how have these Schweinfund, conducted the war so far, and you kind of look at North Africa, and you look at Sicily and Italy, and other island operations and all the rest of it, and you start thinking about what they're doing and what are the patterns here. Well, they seem to like beaches, don't they? And they clearly want air power. And obviously, they can bring some infrastructure with them, but there's a lot of mechanization. That means you need roads. Okay, so just thinking that backwards, what are the kind of sort of places where we need to worry? Okay, so it needs to be within range of air cover and have beaches. That is basically it.
Yeah, it's not.
Everyone else, you don't need to worry about because it isn't going to happen.
It's not rocket surgery, is it? That's the thing. I mean,
Norway, no beaches, zillions of islands, lots of narrow fjords, vast amounts of mountains. It's just not going to happen.
And also, the next part of that is where are these landings most vulnerable? They're most vulnerable on the beaches. I mean, because we talked a lot in the run up to D-Day about the German decision making about do you defend on the crust or do you hold back a Panzer punch and all that sort of stuff. The Allies are very much they've thought about the second one of those, which is to essentially isolate Normandy as a battle space, to use a modern parlance, to strangle the battlefield, to throttle the German ability to reinforce in every sense of the word, to throttle it. Which means that actually the place where you can make the difference is in the beach landing if you're the Germans. So if you've got 300,000 spare blokes or 250,000 spare blokes in Norway, you imagine if there were 2 divisions per beach in Normandy rather than the very thin crust that they end up with, the actual difference that would have made or could have made, and the actual difference to the Overlord planning, because they'd have known it, because the other thing is that the Allies would have known. These things aren't happening they're not phantoms, these formations. If they moved them out of Norway, they'd have known. So you can see why so much effort goes into making sure that people are in Norway, because otherwise it just gets that much more bloody difficult. The thing we talked about, we talked about again and again, and then when we were in Normandy itself, we talked about it, is landing, and amphibious landing is really, really, really hard. It's really difficult, and attacking is really, really hard. And that's the thing I sort of, last week I talking about my book a bit last week, and you were very sweet about the finished effort, but I think that it should actually just be called Attacking is Hard. It's
absolutely brilliant. I completely loved it. I can talk about it now, but I think we should save that until we're closer to publication in September, because you make some really, 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 really interesting points, which has made me kind of think very differently again, which is always what you want to do. You always want to be challenged. So massive full marks for all of that.
Now, on the subject of books, we wanted to talk. We were going to talk about fiction today, weren't we?
Yes. Well, I'm shameless plug. I've got a novel out, and I really enjoy writing fiction. And actually, I got into the subject by writing fiction in the first place, because I wrote these 2 very, very forgettable chitlit novels in the 1990s. And then realised that this wasn't my calling. And then I had my Damascene moment with the Spitfire in the cricket match. And that's what led me to then start writing about the Second World War. But the first book I wrote was called The Burning Blue, and this was a kind of sort of love, loss and war novel set to a backdrop of the Battle of Britain. This is when I went off to see Jeff Whelham for the first time, and Alan Wright, and I interviewed Wendy Maxwell, who'd been Pug Ismay's secretary during literally the whole of the Second World War, and was absolutely in the thick of things and met everybody and all the rest of it. And it came from there. And I wrote these Jack Tanner novels as well subsequently. I wrote 5 of them, which is a sort of sharp stroke hornblower, but of the Second World War. And then I hadn't had a chance to write any fiction until it was lockdown, and that's when I kind of sort of set to this idea, and I kind of wanted to do a kind of sort of Brideshead meets Downton Abbey meets Band of Brothers kind of vibe meets Cold Comfort Farm. So the idea was to kind of write this sort of family saga, 3-generational family saga, but set on a farm in wartime England. And because I think we talked about wartime farming before on the podcast, but it's so interesting, that transformation from producing 14% of our food to kind of 91% by the end of the war. That's a hell of a change. And I wanted to kind of to write about that backdrop, but I also wanted to see what happens to the families and, and how they develop and evolve. And, it's just that point where that, if it was locked down, so everything was shut down and you had to wear masks and everything. But of course it was kind of locked down, and effectively at the start of the Second World War, theatres were shut and cinemas shut. It was curfew and blackouts, and, you didn't have to wear a mask, but you had to carry your gas mask with you everywhere and all that kind of stuff. So there were parallels with the privations, which I thought were kind of really, really interesting. But I also thought, gosh, you think lockdown's bad for a kind of, a couple of months or however long it was. When was it? It was still till June, wasn't it? 3 months.
Yeah, that first one was March till June, wasn't
Something like that. But then you kind of think about guys sort of being sent off to war for 4 years, kind of not seeing their family, going home once. And I remember my friend Sam, who was, I think, was he 3 RTR, Royal Tank Regiment? When he got back home, his sister wasn't a girl anymore. She was grown up, and his mother had gone grey, and school had been destroyed, and because he was from Liverpool, and just completely different. In 4 years is quite a long time, isn't it? And I was sort of thinking how much they all put up with it, and how much that people had to go through. So that was the kind of backdrop.
Well, I think 4 years is a long time if you're 12, isn't it? Or if you're 15. The change, when you're in your 50s, 4 years is like, it's the passage of time in you. But when you're young, that's a huge amount of time. It's a big proportion of your life, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, and I think a year is a proportion of your life, isn't it? It really is.
The difference between being 16 and 20 is a quantum leap, isn't it? Yeah. Whereas because again, getting to grips with time, it's the thing we've talked about before the podcast, didn't we? And we've got an election coming up. If you think of the Johnson election in 2019 as 1939, and now we're in the summer of 1944, 2024. How long ago is that? How does that feel in terms of time? And my Willow was, I don't know, she was 16 when that happened, and now she was 17, and she's 21 now. That's a long time in her life, and a lot of that first lot of pandemic stuff seems quite recent, still feels quite recent, and a lot of it feels like absolutely ancient history. By the way, everybody, if you hear a sort of boiler thundering in the background, I'm in the south of France. I'm literally in the boiler room house, which is where the computer is, because the boiler's just started up. Maybe you can hear it. Anyway, do you think fiction is? This is the hoary old question, but I think one that is really worth asking. Is fiction a good way to tell to teach history, to talk about history?
It can be, can't it? There's two ways of looking at this. First of all, you want to read accurate historical fiction. You want to get interested in the subject matter. So, I think it's great for those people who don't want to kind of read a great big fat tome. I think reading an exciting novel about the Wars of the Roses, for example, is a really good way to give you a flavour of it. It's something I've obviously been thinking a lot about, basically since I wrote Alvesdon, but I've also been thinking a lot about it with my non-fiction, which is, the history books, which is how do you get people closer to the action? How do you get closer to that sense of what it was really like? And as we've talked about before, one of the ways I've been doing that with the books is the history books recently is by using primarily contemporary sources, so letters, diaries. So you're absolutely in the moment. And I had a little play with that on when I was doing Casino. I wrote one chapter in what's called the historic present. So, Mark Clark arrives into the bridgehead at Anzio. He gets out, the Piper Cub gets shot at, but the escorts see them off. And then he drives over to see Lucas, that kind of thing. And I really, really liked it. But my American publishers didn't like it. They thought it was far too kind of outre to kind of to countenance. But I'd already been thinking about doing a kind of what I call a non-fiction fiction. So this is this idea that Michael Shara took in, I think, 1973 when he wrote The Killer Angels. And this is a book about the Battle of Gettysburg in 1863. And Michael Shara did a huge amount of research for this book. So it's all primary research as well. And everyone in this novel is real. There is not a single fictional character. They're not made up, but he gives them thoughts. So, Chamberlain on Little Round Top and all the rest of it, or Pickett or General Pickett or whoever it might be, you get inside their heads. It is read at West Point and all this sort of stuff. It's a much loved novel, but it is a novel. But everyone knows that it's about as close as you're ever going to get to what it was like at Gettysburg. So I've been thinking, let's try and do this on the Second World War because no one's done it. So I think I'm going to do Dunkirk next.
In my book, I've got I used one bit of present tense, and we've had it's gone backwards and forwards about should we do that? And I've found a way around it. So it's basically Stanley Maxted's recording, his vocal commentary of the 3:00 in the afternoon air supply drop. That's on Spotify. Go listen to it, and you hear the gunfire, and you hear it happening. You actually hear the thing that you're writing about. Boom,
how amazing.
Bam, boom. bomb and the drone of the aircraft and bah, bah, bah. And you hear him, no, he can't say it's a disaster. You hear him moderate what he's trying to commentate, but also gunfire is undeniable. And you hear him describe the event, but also in a very, very qualified and guarded way, which is fascinating. Managed to find a way around it. But I said, listening to this throws the listener into an immediate present moment. And then I can say his voice trembles as he describes. You feel I've given myself, I've set that up that I can do that. You have to, you have to qualify everything you say, which you wouldn't have to do in this novel format. Exactly. When I've got Urquhart in his loft, I'm saying perhaps he thought this and perhaps he considered this.
Yeah, and you can't go further than that.
You can't go any further than that. And in fact, sometimes you'll get a note going, is this not a bit too speculative? And you go, well, we're being speculative. It's all right. It's okay. We're trying to sympathise.
I am speculating.
I am speculating. And
but you're making it clear that you're speculating.
Yeah, and I'm trying to sympathise with the guy too. With a novel, you don't need to do that. You can say...
He looked at Thingy and felt how irritated he was by this guy's moustache. I hate moustaches, he thought to himself.
Yeah, and he's reminded of the school teacher caning him that afternoon in...
Yes, exactly that. So I remember doing this talk on Dunkirk at We Have Ways Fest, and I remember thinking, God, this is just so exciting. The kind of the ups and the downs, the kind of the total shit's creek there in any kind of paddle on kind of the morning of Monday the 27th of June or on the evening of the Sunday the 26th of June. And I was thinking, God, it's so dramatic. So I think I'm just going to call it 8 days. The miracle of Dunkirk or something like that. I'm not going to put in any fictional characters at all. They're all going to be real. And I'm going to use diaries and letters and, all the same thing, but I am going to give them thoughts. So here's an example. All the minutes of the War Cabinet meetings, for example, they are there. They exist. The Prime Minister then turned to the Foreign Secretary and said, so now I can put that in the present tense. I can put that in speech. Put that in speech. I don't have to put it in the past anymore. And also the big thing is what did Churchill say to Halifax in the garden on the afternoon of Monday the 27th? Well, you can make that up now. I mean, we've got a pretty good idea, right?
Yeah, what he must have said, yeah.
What he probably said, now, Edward, and he would have flattered him and soothed him.
And he just said, perfectly well, all the agreements these people have made up to this point, they've gone back on, that.
But we can imagine it. And we can get, and you can go from there and you can go to Hitler's headquarters and you can go from there to the cockpit of a Stuka, to the dunes at behind the beaches at Le Pan and Bray Dunes and all the rest of it. You can do all that and you can get there. You can get inside the head of Bill Tennant, the senior naval officer. And it'll either work or it won't work. But I really want to give it a punt. I want to kind of push that fourth wall. I think it'd be really, really interesting. And I think if you can do it and you can pull it off, then obviously that's a really exciting proposition. And all that has come about from doing Alvesdon, which has just been so interesting. I couldn't have written that book 20 years ago, but now I can because I'm so sort of intimately involved and done so much research, across a subject and that kind of feeling, and to go into that kind of little tight community.
Well, let's take a break, and then we'll come back to how you've done that, and then I think talk about some of our favourite Second World War fiction as well. Welcome back to We Have Ways of Making You Talk. Because one of the things you have done an awful lot of is you've read tons of letters and diaries. So tone must be a thing you've come to pretty straightforwardly in writing the fiction. How people talk to each other, how they moderate their emotions with each other and all that sort of stuff, yeah?
Well, yes, and the truth of the matter is they do and they don't. There's a lot more, obviously, there's a lot more kind of stiff upper lip than there was, but there's a huge amount of worrying and internalizing of concerns and stuff. And you see this in the diaries. I mean, people are not holding back at all.
But is a stiff upper lip not an aspiration rather than a reality? You know what I mean?
Yes, exactly that. You're absolutely bang on. That's exactly that. And just imagine you're a 40-something father and you've got late teenage children or children in their early 20s, and you've been through the First World War.
Yeah.
And here we are again. And everything you've done since the First World War has been about safeguarding the future and making sure this never happens again and creating a safe environment for your family, for your kids, for everyone's in it, a successful business. And suddenly this is under threat. What are you going to feel like? You're going to be absolutely devastated. You're going to be beside yourself with worry and concern. and not knowing how to deal with these new challenges that are coming your way, both financially, from a business point of view, the uncertainty of where you're going to be next week, next year, 5 years' time, and what's going to happen to the people that you love most. Once you impose that back onto a scenario, it's actually quite easy to kind of visualize it because, A, you've got lots of diaries and stuff to call upon. But of course, these people they're not very different. They are the same people that you and I know. It's just as a passage of 80 years or whatever. But basically, they're the same. They love, they hate, they get cross, they laugh, they worry. It's all the same things. It's a world without iPhones and AirPods and GPS tracking, and
which makes things simpler.
Well, it does make it simpler in many ways. Yeah, it does mean you can pull off Overlord. But and I really wanted to get into the heads of the younger generation who are having to confront this. And how are you feeling about it? If you're a farmhand, you can be exempt. Do you want to be exempt? And how much does the pressure of everyone going off to war and not wanting to miss it? You don't want to go, but you don't want to miss it either. And
well, and again,
how does that come in?
And again, that's like a sort of self-reinforcing notion, isn't it? Because if everyone thinks that's what everyone else is thinking, then you end up thinking that. Whereas in fact, no one might be thinking that. Everyone might be thinking. Right. Simple complication of that notion. I don't want to miss out because everyone else must be thinking I don't want to miss out. Well, maybe they're not. You just know there's no way of knowing ever.
But I think the other thing I think is really important to understand is, until COVID happened, we were we'd been so inured to kind of deep crisis for such a long time. You just couldn't imagine it. And then you have really major events happening, whether it be, what is happening in Ukraine or what's happening in Gaza, or whether it be lockdown or whatever. And suddenly that becomes a kind of new normal. And it is amazing how quickly we adjust from something that seems completely alien to something that is just, once the shock dies down, it becomes normal. And I think that's the other thing that, I was trying to kind of sort of put back into this book. I mean, the other thing I thought was really, really interesting was, I've got this German character who gets sent off to the Isle of Man. And, she's absolutely not a Nazi in any shape or form. But she ends up being, in the whole sort of bang them all up phase, she ends up in the Isle of Man. And the interesting thing about the women and children is they were put in this kind of pair at the southern part of the island, which is basically just these two villages, which were then sort of cordoned off with wire. So the southern part of the Isle of Man just became this big camp. It wasn't a camp as in such a, in terms of sort of wooden huts and palisades and all the rest of it and watchtowers. It was just the whole part of that southern peninsula of the Isle of Man was a camp. And what happens to those people? And a lot of these people were just put up in, in local houses or whatever. How does that happen? Just trying to picture so you've got so I had a situation where I've got my kind of heroine. I've then got a Jewish girl, and then I've got a Nazi. A Nazi who's been an au pair in England and is, rabidly kind of, she's done BDM and all that kind of stuff and the youth movements, and she's just been radicalized, to the Nazis' way of thinking. What happens when those three people are in the house and the housekeeper is just a sort of quiet, mind your own P's and Q's kind of, widower, or widow rather? What happens to those four people and who are thrust together? I mean, because the Nazi can't just keep going on and on and on and on and on about kind of how awful the Jew is, and the Jew can't keep going on and on endlessly every day because they're under the same roof and having to share meals together. So there's going to be a point where they're finding commonality. And of course, that's exactly what happens. And because I started to write these kind of these sequences of conversations, and they just didn't work because you realize, but that would never happen because after a while they've got to kind of go, oh, could you pass me the butter, please? Do you want to come swimming? When what happened? And then you suddenly remember about kind of, what happens to people when you hate each other at school, or there's a school bully and you're trying to avoid him. Well, you're trying to avoid him, but eventually what you tend to find is the moment that you actually spend any decent amount of time with someone, what you immediately exaggerate is exactly those points of commonality rather than the differences, because you suddenly think, okay, well, we've been thrown together, we've got to get on.
But this is interesting, isn't it? Because we've talked about walking the ground. This is like walking human emotional ground.
Walking the talk.
Yeah. Yeah, what do people like? That's a thing from life experience again, and you're being so involved in the period, you can sketch characters with a sort of accurate enough tone. Because I've read a fair bit of Second World War fiction, and I always think it's and my favourite book novel is Catch-22, which is a Second World War novel. Although loads of people go, no, it's a Vietnam War novel because it was written during the 60s. No, it's not. It's a Second World War novel. People wanted it to be a Vietnam War novel because they didn't want someone being so flip about the Second World War, because the Second World War is special and sacred and Greatest Generation and all that sort of stuff, rather than, rampant American military culture and capitalism and all the things that are in the crazy and anti-war craziness that's in the book.
Yeah, well, I think all that is incredibly accurate.
But the bomb line, moving the bomb line, having the number of missions upped, the continual thing of that, men having to cope with that. Well, we know that happened in 8th Air Force. We know it's true. You think you've done your missions, and then actually they add some on because that's a milk run, that doesn't count. All this sort of stuff, and that's what the novel is about. That's about how do you cope with that? How do you cope with the daily possibility that you will die horribly? Every single day. And what does it do to see other people living through that and coping with that? What does that do to you? That's as effective as reading, those morale surveys that John McManus directed us towards, which are amazing.
Yeah.
And are absolutely worth your time. But as a sort of funny, digestible way of looking at the Second World War, again, a novel is as good a way in. And Helen knew of what he wrote because he'd been a bomb aimer in the Mediterranean campaign. He'd done it. He'd lived on Pantelleria. Based out of Pinoza, I can't remember. Anyway, but whatever. The point is, he'd done it. He'd done the whole thing, and he'd been to write. And there's all the stuff about the Italian civilian population, all the women in prostitution, the Americans going there, making the most of that. The different men's differing attitude to it. There's wonderful old Italian character laughing at them all, going, "Well, we're the people who are going to win this war because you're using up your young people on it, you're spending your fortune on it. We carry on being Italian. Who's won?" Actually,
all that depiction of Italian life is absolutely spot on. I've absolutely no doubt about it whatsoever. I mean, I think there's some absolutely amazing fiction. There's some pretty contemporary fiction or fiction by people who've lived through it. I mean, you go to Evil in War. I mean, obviously, I think Brideshead Revisited is a kind of war novel in a way, and it was written in 1942, I think, or 43. And it depicts Charles Ryder, the protagonist, at the beginning of the book. He's stuck in the middle of the war, and it's all kind of very banal and mundane. And there's a stuffy colonel who picks him up because there's a smashed window, and
that's right, yeah.
Stuff. But then he wrote later after the war. He then wrote the Sword of Honor trilogy, which is amazing. It's just a fantastic depiction of society at that time, and obviously officer class society. But then there's Olivia Manning, of course. Who I kind of read voraciously when I was doing one of my tanners, and I was setting it in Cairo to get that kind of sense of mood. And he also Evelyn Waugh wrote a brilliant book called Put Out More Flags, which is just about sort of a posh waster who's kind of trying to find his place, which is sort of what Sword of Honor is about as well. It's just, this crazy world which has arrived. How do you fit in if you're a misfit? And Put Out More Flags is really, really funny. And particularly about the experience of kind of right at the start of the novel with evacuees coming into the village and how they behave, and this sort of clash of different peoples and societies and classes and stuff. It's really good. But then, of course, there's been some fantastic novels as well, set written way after the war. And I suppose you're thinking about Alan First, or he writes these spy novels, or someone like
or even when someone like Ian McEwan comes to it. So Atonement, I think, is really an excellent. A lot of people will know the film, the Dunkirk scenes in that, but the book is evocative on that scale, and that's interesting that he's a literary novelist, and he decided to write a Second World War novel, and brought all that to it too. I mean, I think it is that thing of being able to get into people's heads in a way that the historian is not allowed to. That I think is the beguiling thing about the novel. I mean, you only have to look at the success of Hilary Mantel's "Suddenly We Know What Thomas Cromwell Thinks," rather than wonder what his motivations might have been, which is the
right. And of course, the point about all that is that no one's denying that she's done gargantuan amounts of research for it.
Yeah,
but I think it's also fair to say that there's some absolutely dreadful Second World War novels where the history is absolutely pants, and they're just completely unreadable. I mean, honestly, if I start reading a Second World War novel and I know something's completely inaccurate, I'm afraid it goes in the bin. I mean, it's just. But I think, you know, someone like Philip Kerr's Bernie Gunter novels, for example. I mean, it's just such a brilliant conceit to have a kind of sort of, you know, a noirish kind of Philip Marlowe-esque kind of private eye, effectively kind of running through the Nazi regime. It's genius. And, you know, again, his research is really good. You know, most of it's pretty much on point, I'd say. You know, he gets into the kind of the madness of the Nazi mindset, Nazi society very, very well. And, you know, it's really, really effective. They're completely compelling and brilliant novels. The other one that's a really brilliant book, and it's set just after the war, really. Well, I suppose, no, it is during the war because it's summer of 1945 and it's not over in the Pacific yet. Is The Good German by Joseph Cannon, Kanon. And it was made into a pretty forgettable film, but
yes,
the
that's
book
right.
is absolutely brilliant. It's really, if anyone hasn't read that, I just can't recommend it highly enough.
Isn't
Brilliant.
That's about Berlin sort of in summer of 45.
Yeah.
It's a George Clooney film, isn't it?
But the novel is brilliant.
Yeah, isn't that's based on or partly based on the story of Stella, who's the blonde Jewish woman who betrayed people to the Nazis in the last phase of the war.
That's it.
She would go and find what they called Jews who were hiding in Berlin, called themselves submarines, U-boats. She would sniff them out for the
dosh.
If you were to direct people to, like, apart from Alvesdon, obviously, if you were to direct people to, I don't know, 3 Second World War novels, because often it's a palate cleanser from reading them, and apart from A Pair of Silver Wings, of course, as well.
Yeah. Well, I did enjoy writing that.
Well, because the thing actually, the thing the novel definitely offers you is narrative in a way that the history might not, because sometimes in history, that's the thing you've made a great virtue of, is making your books powerful narratively, because very often history offers no narrative. History can just be literally one thing after another, can't it? That's the in a way the problem with it, or can be the problem with it.
Well, I would say The Narrow Road to the Deep North, which won the Booker Prize a few years ago, is just an absolutely amazing novel. The depiction of what it was like working on the Thai-Burma Railway is just absolutely amazing.
Right, okay.
I've never read a more vivid, accurate, brutal portrayal of what it was like. He absolutely nails it. It's such a haunting, brilliant novel. I mean, God, if ever a book deserves a Booker Prize, it's that one. It is absolutely an amazing, outstanding achievement. Then I think, you know, those Evelyn Waugh books that we talked about, and Joseph Heller. And if you want to read something about, you know, Americans, then you know, go to The Thin Red Line by James Jones, which is a fictionalized version of his own experiences on Guadalcanal. And what he's very good at is a sense of mood and place and the vernacular conversation between the GIs that are there, because they're not Marines, they're army, they're part of an army infantry division that fights on Galloping Horse on the Guadalcanal campaign. And it just takes you there. I mean, you know, it is just, that's the right mood, it's the right tone, it's just,
he just nails it.
So it's just, he just nailed it. And I wouldn't go too light is my...
Yeah, no, don't go light. No. These books should be heavy. They should be.
Well, and Joseph Heller's brilliant because, again, it's just, he just nails that, as you say, the kind of airfield life in the middle of a foreign country, civilian life of what it's like, Challenge trying to make sense of this insane situation, you know, everyone trying to make sense of the kind of bonkers situation, which, let's face it, campaign in Italy is utterly mad.
Well, thanks everyone for listening. By the way, there is more D-Day to come if you've been enjoying our D-Day series. And thanks to everyone who's subscribed to our Apple subscription channel, Officer Class channel, I believe it's called. I think we've called it that, didn't we? And of course, the Patreons you've joined us too.
Boys are allowed these days.
Yes, did you pass the WASB and pay you £5? And also there is We Have Waste Fest. And we're beginning to get ground rush on that. They're starting to, the ground is about to come up and it'll be upon us soon, because it's June shortly and then it'll be July. And we would love to see you there. 19th to 21st of July, at Black Pit Brewery, wehavewastefest.co.uk. For tickets, their day tickets, their weekend tickets. Kids under 16, I think, are free. And it is going to be more family friendly than last year. Thanks for listening, everybody. We will see you all very soon. Alvesdon is out when, James?
13th of June.
13th of June.
13th of June, yeah.
In all good bookshops and WH Smiths, as they used to say. And we will see you. We will see you soon. Thanks for listening, everybody. Cheerio.
Cheerio.